This video is based on the euro, and it's considering what the euro is. It's considering why the euro was created in terms of the benefits of the euro and what it would bring. But it also looks at how you actually go about adopting the euro. So just to start off with, the euro is the official currency for 19 of the 27 EU member states. So it was introduced physically in 2002, but 3 years prior to 2002, it was created, but it was considered to be an invisible currency whilst they were pretty much creating and getting ready for the physical launch, which was, of course, 2002. And that was after 40 years of preparation. So the European Central Bank and the European Commission, now they're in charge of maintaining its value and stability, but also for establishing the criteria required for EU countries to enter the Eurozone or the Euro area. Now I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that within this video, and I'm going to specifically look at Cyprus as an example. But before I do anything, I'm just going to show you a quick video just based on the history of the euro.
This is Europe's most significant monetary reform since the Roman Empire. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the history of the euro. The euro is the form of currency used by the ever-evolving Eurozone countries. The Eurozone consists of countries from the European Union that adopted the euro as their common currency and only legal tender. While the euro was officially introduced on January 1st, 1999, the idea behind this common currency dated back decades. Historically, Europe was one of the world's largest trading regions, but that trade was complicated by fragmented currencies. As early as 1929, the League of Nations contemplated an economic and monetary union. However, World War II derailed those ambitions. During the Cold War, efforts to strengthen ties between non-communist nations were made. 1951's Paris Treaty linked Belgium, France, West Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and created the European Coal and Steel Community. Those 6 countries signed the Treaty of Rome in 1958 to found the European Economic Community, which was a precursor to the European Union. The idea of economic cooperation eventually resurfaced. A report published in 1970 suggested the centralization of financial policies in Europe. This set the wheels in motion for a single European currency and central bank. In 1979, most of the EEC nations instituted the European monetary system to stabilize exchange rates and offset inflation of the newly created European Currency Unit, or ECU. Much of the 1980s was spent realistically planning the establishment of the Economic and Monetary Union. 1986's Single European Act augmented cooperation between the EEC nations in terms of politics and economics. The bold Maastricht Treaty was signed February 7, 1992, and it was this accord that created the European Union. It also established 1999 as a deadline for the creation of a common currency and set the basis for the shared financial strategy. Countries were required to meet stringent criteria in order to sign the agreement. Low budget deficits and debt ratios were just some of the required measures. The groundwork for the euro was laid during the 1990s. The European Monetary Institute replaced the EMCF in 1994 and became the prototype for the European Central Bank. The currency's name euro was chosen in December 1995. As many countries endorsed it to their populations, the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Sweden eventually decided to opt out of its use and kept their own currencies. Each participating nation's currency was converted to the euro via triangulation. This negated discrepancies between the various countries' standards for rounding and important numbers. It was finally determined in December 1998 that 1 ECU would equal 1 euro. The euro was first circulated on January 1, 1999, in non-cash transactions and accounting. For example, travelers' checks, stocks, and mortgages were all available in euros. The national currencies of the Eurozone countries were then discontinued and established at fixed rates with each other. The changeover to the euro was a 3-year transition. Paper money and coinage from the old system was accepted until 2002, at which point enough euro notes and coins had been produced. After its launch, the euro performed better than expected. It opened trading on January 5th at $1.19 US. Dealers were amazed by how quickly it replaced the national currencies. For example, the mighty Deutschmark was predicted to trade in parallel, but it disappeared immediately. Following the introduction of this currency, the Eurozone expanded and changed significantly. Greece qualified for membership in 2001, and more nations joined in the years that followed. As the world experienced a financial crisis in 2007-2008, so did the Eurozone. Problems in Europe stemmed from the strict guidelines member countries were expected to adhere to, and from the over-optimistic idea that the work ethics and viewpoints on debt of these countries would converge over time. Aside from strengthening ties between Eurozone countries, the euro helped increase tourism within that area.
So these are the 19 countries that have adopted the euro, and the following countries that I'm going to put on now are the ones that have applied to adopt the euro, but they just have to wait until their applications have been granted, and that's to do with the convergence criteria, which I'm going to delve into soon. But so all these countries are currently part of the ERM2, and the ERM2 is the European exchange rate mechanism, and is just part of the process of that convergence to be able to adopt the euro, which again I'll delve into soon. Now, Sweden had previously opted out, as the video before told you, as did obviously the UK, but the UK is no longer part of the EU. And the other country is Denmark, who opted out. And currently Denmark has no plan of adopting the euro. So when we're looking at adopting the euro, we need to wonder, well, how do countries actually join and are able to adopt the euro? Okay, so to begin with, before we even think about how to adopt the euro, we have to consider the Maastricht Treaty. So the Maastricht Treaty of 1993 set out the initial plans for the creation of the single European currency. So obviously it came into full existence in 2002, but the plans really accelerated from 1993 in this treaty. Now, as part of the treaty, there was three major factors that were considered. So for number one, you had to give up the use of your interest rates. For number two, you had to give up your exchange rate. And for number three, you had to give up the ability to create new money. So when I'm looking at number one, I'm looking at number two. You have to consider it in terms of policy. And actually what that means is if you're giving up your interest rate and you're giving up your ability to create money, you're pretty much giving up your domestic power to carry out monetary policy. So with regards to monetary policy, obviously you'll set interest rates based on your domestic economy, and the economic cycle. But if you're part of the eurozone, that's now the European Central Bank's place in terms of policy, and they have to create that policy for all 19 member states. So you do lose that domestic power of monetary policy. And if you wanted to, for example, in a recession, or think about now with the pandemic, if you wanted to carry out quantitative easing, because for example, the interest rate is already very, very low of the eurozone, and if you wanted to carry out additional policy, such as creating extra digital money via QE, you wouldn't be able to unless the European Central Bank actually confirmed it, and they would be ahead of it, and they would decide the level of QE that would take place. Now, with regards to the convergence criteria, we're going to start to delve into it now because that was followed up from this treaty. So to begin with, what you had to do was have price stability. So the price stability was the inflation rate could not be higher than 1.5 percentage points above the rate of the three best performing member states. And number two, sound and sustainable public finances. So that was based on your budget deficit and your national debt, and the country should not be under the excessive deficit procedure. Number three, the exchange rate stability. So that was to do with the ERM2, which I've already mentioned, and you'd have to be part of it for at least 2 years. And that's just to make it easier for obviously when you converted to the euro, because your currency would have already been fixed onto the euro, meaning that transition shouldn't be as difficult. However, in those 2 years, if you had to, for example, devalue your currency because you were struggling to fix it to the euro, then actually that would go against you and you'd have to spend longer as part of the ERM. And the final stage, or the final factor, was long-term interest rates. So the long-term interest rates should not be higher than the 2 percentage points above the rate of the three best performing member states. If you pass all of these, then obviously you will be able to adopt the euro, and this is what pretty much the EU's website states on this criteria. So this is on the European Commission website, and it gives you just an indication as to how you'd pass the criteria. So for example, price stability, sound and sustainable public finances, the durability of convergence, and the exchange rate stability. It tells you how it's measured and the convergence criteria in itself. So if countries wanted to adopt the euro, they'd have to pass every single one of these before they were obviously granted the permission to adopt the euro. And that's just to make sure that when the country does adopt the euro, they're in the best position to do so. Because obviously, if they adopt the euro and it goes terribly wrong, then it's not just their country that's going to be impacted, it's going to be every single Eurozone country. So all of the other 19 countries. Now, if you go on the European Commission website, you can actually download the reports based on the countries that have adopted the euro, and it tells you how they did with this convergence criteria. And one of those countries is Cyprus, and that's what we're going to look at now. So again, Cyprus, there is a report, and what I've done is I've just picked out some of the key factors from the report. So to begin with, this is the inflation criteria. So as we can see, you've got the reference value. Now the reference value, as we've already mentioned before, is usually based on the top 3 performing EU members. So what we've got in 12 months, average inflation in Cyprus was below the reference value since August 2005. So the average inflation rate in Cyprus during the 12 months to March 2007 of when they actually got it granted was 2%, which was below the reference value of 3%. So clearly it was it didn't exceed it by 1.5% or anything along the lines, and they easily passed this criteria. Now, the second one was to do with the government budget balance and debt, and it's in the opinion on the December 2006 update of the Convergence Programme of Cyprus that councils considered that after the correction of the excessive deficit in 2005, Cyprus was making very good progress towards the medium-term objective, and that the budgetary strategy in the programme seemed sufficient. So Cyprus did carry out fiscal policy to try to correct that deficit and try to make sure that the government balance was much more within the lines of the convergence criteria, and therefore again they passed that. Now the next one was the to do with the the exchange rate of the ERM2 and the Cyprus pound. So that was their previous currency before they obviously adopted the euro. The Cyprus pound had participated in the ERM2 since the 2nd of May 2004. But before that, the Central Bank of Cyprus had been operating a unilateral peg on the euro. So they were containing fluctuations with a relatively narrow margin. So they were definitely prepared for obviously adopting the euro with regards to exchange rate, because not only did they peg it, but then they also joined the ERM2. Now, in terms of long-term interest rates, the average long-term interest rate in Cyprus in the year to March 2007 was 4.2%, which was below the reference value of 6.4%. So the average long-term interest rate in Cyprus had been below the reference value since November 2005. So again, when we're thinking about all the tests, Cyprus passed every single one. So with regards to the benefits of being or having the euro, these are the benefits that were outlined by some of the countries that were really influential in the creation of the euro. So to begin with, more choice and stable prices for consumers and citizens. So it's all to do with price comparisons. So if you're, for example, one of the 19 Eurozone countries, and you trade quite heavily with one of the other Eurozone countries, it makes it so much easier that you know what the prices are going to be, because you don't have to worry about about converting into a different currency. It makes it so much more simple and transparent, and therefore, because of that ease and because of that transparency, it actually probably encourages and promotes trade. Now, you don't have to worry about the exchange rate fluctuating between your currencies because you've got the same currency. So if, for example, your currency appreciated or depreciated against the other currency, how that might impact imports and exports, you don't have to worry about that because you've both got the exact same currency, which just makes it so much more stable. And another factor is, if you think about it in terms of these Eurozone countries are also part of the EU. So they're part of the single market, which means there's also the elimination of tariffs and quotas. So if you've got no tariffs, no quotas, no cross-border checks, and then also the exact same currency, it really does promote the trade between these countries and makes it, again, because of that trade, giving more choice and that stability of prices for consumers and citizens. Another factor is in terms of more integrated financial markets. So when I'm talking about financial markets, all I mean is, for example, money markets, bond markets, equity markets, or just simply the banking markets. And if we think about, for example, the banking markets, it does allow for a smooth function of cross-border payments, which allow banks to trade safely. So I think that's a key factor. And it's just, again, a clear cross-border orientation with all these countries that are involved. And again, if you think about it in terms of bond markets, because these countries that are involved all have one major central bank, which is the European Central Bank, that also integrates them within that market as well. And when you've got a more integrated financial market, when you've got greater choice and stable prices, which encourages trade, obviously then that leads to improved economic growth. And again, with regards to all of these factors, if they all do encourage trade with one another, then that is going to lead to obviously higher levels of growth, which will boost the GDP of these countries. And another factor is it allows for a stronger presence for the EU in the global economy, and it's a tangible sign of European identity, which I think it's always been a crucial factor. Whenever the ECC was created and when it turned into the European Union, and obviously we've got the euro, it was all to do with really building up the EU and building up Europe, and making it a major force in global economics. Now, I'm just going to quickly go over the UK, because obviously the UK, it has now left the EU, but there was a point when they were considering adopting the euro, and they opted out, as I mentioned at the beginning. Now, I just wanted to give you a bit of information as to why they opted out. And at the time, Gordon Brown, he carried out 5 tests as to whether they should adopt the euro or not. So it wasn't based on the euro's convergence criteria. You could argue the UK almost created their own to see whether it would be in their best interests to adopt the euro. Now, one of them was economic harmonisation. So that is, our business cycles and economic structures compatible so that we and others could live comfortably with euro interest rates on a permanent basis. Now, at the point, in fact, a few years prior to this, there were some issues with the UK housing market as well. I'm going to delve into this with 1 and 2. But there were some issues with the UK housing market, and the UK housing market did see quite a fluctuation in prices and therefore a little bit of uncertainty. And the UK had at that point just managed to kind of get it to a stable point. And I think the UK were concerned about losing that power of monetary policy, because obviously interest rates are so integral with the housing market with regards to mortgages. So I think that was a key factor, and therefore they decided actually we're better off having our own monetary policy, and therefore they decided that failed that test. The second test, if problems emerge, is there sufficient flexibility to deal with them? So again, when we're thinking about the monetary policy, they believed not, but also it relates to fiscal policy as well, because obviously in terms of the debt procedure, the UK didn't want to be limited, even though there were no worries with that at the time. They didn't want that to be limited by fiscal and monetary policy. The third one was in terms of investment. So would joining the EMU create better conditions for firms making long-term decisions to invest in Britain? Now, there was a lot of criticism against this one, because actually a lot of people argued that they believe that investment would have been encouraged, and FDI, it would have been more attractive to have the euro because, again, of the ease of converting, not having to convert in terms of having the exact same currency and just price comparisons and everything else. But Gordon Brown argued that if we're going to fail 1 and 2, then actually it might also impact investment in FDI, because if we do experience economic problems, or the euro does experience a crisis, then actually the UK would be pretty limited with how it could find solutions, and therefore that might actually go against them when trying to attract investment. Number 4 was financial services, and you have to remember financial services is the unique selling point of the UK. It's got a big surplus in terms of the current account on financial services. So what impact would entry into the EMU have on the competitive position of the UK's financial service industry, particularly the city's wholesale markets? And this actually passed, because not because it would make it more attractive, but just because they didn't believe it would have any impact at all, and therefore it wasn't really a risk. And the final one, which again failed. In summary, will joining EMU promote higher growth, stability and a lasting increase in jobs? And actually at the stage and at the point they carried out these tests, the UK had been growing at a faster rate than the Eurozone countries. So again, they believed that that wouldn't be the case, and it could potentially go against them because the UK was performing better at that time.